Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Whole Wellness Mama Summit, where we are unlocking the healthiest, less stressed mom in you using strategies from various wellness experts. I am your host, Amy Nesbitt, and I'm super excited to sit down and talk about anxiety today with Dr. Mary Wilde. She is an integrative pediatrician who focuses on behavioral health, particularly anxiety, and she's an author, podcaster, TEDx speaker, and mom to 8 amazing sons. As a fellow boy mom, that excites me dearly. Welcome, Dr. Mary.
Thank you.
For those that are meeting you for the first time, can you share your quick story of how you came to where you are now?
Yes. Um, when I was even like a little kid, the thing that I always said that I wanted to be when I grew up was a baby doctor, which was my way of saying a pediatrician. And so I've always seen myself being a doctor. And um, as I went through my training, I quickly realized that I didn't necessarily resonate with kind of the traditional medical model, that I like to take time with my clients. I like to really have more of an empowerment model rather than like quick fixes with, medication and prescriptions. And so I kind of charted my own path and became an integrative pediatrician, meaning that I really deal with the child as a whole person. And through time, I also have developed online programs to really support parents in supporting their kids, because I feel like you as moms have such a frontline and vital role in supporting the mental health of your kids and supporting your own mental health. So I'm really happy to be here to share some thoughts with you.
We are so glad to have you. Well, anxiety is a huge topic, especially as we are coming out of a pandemic where our lives completely change. So I think this is great. We all feel anxiety at different points in time, but or anxious. I should say we all feel anxious at different points in time, but anxiety feels very different to me when we use the term anxiety. Can we start with a baseline of what we mean by anxiety, how it differs from stress or overwhelm, depression? I know that's a little more extreme, but also what is going on physically in our brains?
Yes. So it's interesting how you kind of spoke quickly at first, saying like, let's talk about being anxious. I mean, anxiety. And then that really brings up how we semantically sometimes don't differentiate between these things. Like we say, oh, I'm stressed, or I'm feeling anxious, or I have anxiety. And we just throw those terms around kind of interchangeably. And in some ways, I don't think it matters in a way to do very deep delineations. I mean, of course, if you're going to a doctor and you're going to like seek for intensive treatment, then we do have to sort out diagnostically what you're experiencing. But the main thing is that we just want to get to a functional and happy place. and and so that's what we're all wanting. And I think that really what we mean when we say anxiety is usually that our nervous system is dysregulated and we are triggered in some way. And usually that's happening because our amygdala is on alarm and it is activating our sympathetic nervous system. And so when this happens, all kinds of things happen physiologically that we experience somatically, like in our bodies. Sometimes our heart races, sometimes we like have kind of fast, shallow breathing. Sometimes we just feel tension in our shoulders or in our face.
Mhm.
Sometimes we have stomach aches, sometimes we have headaches. Sometimes we just feel really negative. Sometimes we feel like we can't do things, like we feel restricted. And that really affects and limits our experience and our kids' experience. Like this whole idea of carefree, happy childhood, sometimes it's not something that we feel like we can claim or our kids are claiming. Um, so I think that it all boils down to getting ourselves to a place where we can feel functional and relatively peaceful and happy.
Mhm. Yeah, it was definitely coming out of the pandemic, and I have a young one. So, going back into school and all the changes because he was in preschool and then actually being with people again, even though he was before, huge shifts. and it made him definitely very anxious. So
Mhm.
what are some of those most common things that you see and how it manifests? And where should we be concerned as parents that we need to do something more for our kids?
That's a really good question. I think that's where a lot of parents are kind of on this fence of like, is this just like the run of the mill stress, or is this something that I have to actually do something different about, intervene for? And I think some of those questions come down to the intensity and duration of the symptoms. And typical manifestations of anxiety include things like avoidance. Kids who are just like not wanting to participate, and we know that they can, we know they're capable, we know they want to participate, but something is there holding them back from full participation and kind of like full living. And so that is one way that it manifests. But as I mentioned before, it can also, manifest in somatic symptoms like headache and stomach ache. And there are physiologic reasons for this, because when our amygdala is triggered, then things change within our body, putting us in like this fight, flight, freeze mode, and even the blood flow changes. So we actually have less blood flow going to our the front part of our brain, and less blood flow going to our digestive system. And so it all makes sense. But when we don't realize that, we feel all broken and confused about what's happening in our bodies. But I also see some kids who are just very negative, like they just are always kind of like shooting down every idea. They just don't want to try. And that can be really frustrating as a parent. And sometimes we don't realize that that is actually anxiety.
Mm.
And anxiety, because it causes avoidance, it can really lead to isolation and then develop into a secondary depression.
Mm.
And because in order to feel like we have a sense of self-efficacy, we need to be able to do things and show ourselves we do things. But a lot of times with anxiety, we keep closing down our world smaller and smaller and smaller, and get more restricted. And then we're sort of less delighted with ourselves because we just are like, well, I can't do this and I can't do that, and look at me, I'm alone, nobody's talking to me. And so it just
Even though
becomes
you
this.
want to, right? You want to, but then you
Right.
can't. Mhm.
Right. So it's a big vicious cycle.
So is this similar? So if a child is negatively speaking to themselves, right? If they say I'm a dummy, or I can't do it, like all those negative things, is that similar? Or is that different?
Well, I think that it can look, you have to sometimes tease it out because it can look the same. um, and you have to kind of get to the underlying self-talk, that is bringing that
Mm.
idea forward. Like, is it because they are worried and anxious and fearful
Mm.
that they're criticizing themselves, or is it something else?
Mhm, mhm,
So is the underlying feeling stress and fear, or is it sadness?
mhm.
And sometimes one can lead to the other. So it does take some teasing out.
Yeah. It's difficult, right? We all have this fear of not being able to do things well, or in front of other people and all those things.
Mhm.
Got it. Well, what are some helpful tools that we can help our kids with to cope with these anxious moments or anxiety?
Yes. And I think, like you said, we all experience anxious moments, but when it becomes like a pervading experience, then it's especially important to recognize and deal with, because anxiety doesn't tend to go away. It's like a habit of thought that just perpetuates itself.
Mhm, mhm.
And so I think it's really valuable to step in early rather than late in the game.
Yeah.
But I would love to share some slides to talk a little bit more about this. One of the first things is to help our kids recognize that they're normal, and that anxiety and anxious feelings and stress aren't always bad, that it's our nervous system's way of trying to protect us. And so sometimes we can, excuse me, we can pause and even like say, thank you for trying to protect me, for trying to have my back, so to speak. But, like an overprotective parent or, a well meaning friend, sometimes well intentioned protection isn't what we need. And so we need to be able to kind of rise above that and step out of it and, use what's helpful and discard what's not. So
Mhm.
I think I'd love to just start with the recognition that emotional intelligence is so vital. And a lot of people are like, well, what is even emotional intelligence? I've heard people talk about it, but what is it? And it's a phrase that was really popularized and coined by Daniel Goleman, a psychologist. And he did a lot of research around this idea of emotional intelligence and recognized that it's not so much like our kids' IQ or even our socioeconomic status, educational level that actually predicts success and happiness in our kids. It is how they emotionally relate to their experience. And he identifies four components to emotional intelligence. And the first kind of relate to the self, and the others relate to how we interpersonally interact. So the quadrants are, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and social skills. And so I think it's important to just start there that these skills are so important, but sometimes we're so busy focusing on like getting our kids in ballet class, getting them on the soccer team, having them, get good grades, that we forget how important it is for them to have these emotional skills. And Daniel Goleman has said people with well developed emotional skills are more likely to be content and effective in their lives, mastering the habits of mind that foster their own productivity. And I really see that. I've experienced that. And, going back to the idea of kind of how I got in this path, I was an anxious child. And I, as I did this inner work as an adult, I, retrospectively realized how anxious I really was and how restricted I was and how it affected my experience. And I just thought, I don't want this to be the experience of other kids. I want them to learn these tools and skills early. And then mom anxiety is a whole nother thing that we all have to combat. And so in my programs, I really work with families in a holistic way, really getting at the whole family system and how, because a lot of times it rallies around this anxious child and actually sabotages our greatest wish to empower our child and sends kids the message that we don't actually think that they can handle it.
Mhm.
So anyway,
We're
um
trying to do everything to take away their pain, right? Or to
right. So common pitfalls that I see with parents who notice that their child may be experiencing anxiety is thinking, oh, it's just gonna go away. It's just a phase, or reinforcing the anxiety, kind of like what you're talking about, by actually letting the anxiety rule the family. And it's amazing. We it's like, the frog in boiling water who doesn't jump out because they don't realize that the water is getting hotter and hotter because it's happening gradually. We get so enmeshed in our kids' anxiety and actually in creating a system that reinforces it. And it's crazy. We can't see it because it's happened gradually. So, and then also sometimes we have a limited view of what the tools are. Like we think, oh, I think my daughter or my son is anxious, so I'm gonna have to start a medication. I really don't want to, but I really have to. Or they're gonna have to go to therapy for years. And
uh-huh.
we have this idea that those are the only two options. And I want to say that is not true. They are options. They are helpful options, but they're just a few options among many. And that is what I teach the families that I work with, that the goal is really building resilience, and our child is a whole person. They're not just a few brain chemicals in a test tube, and they're not just a walking brain, they're a whole being. And so there are so many ways that we can get at this anxiety. So,
Can I ask about the reinforcing the anxiety part?
yes.
Um, so in that, do you mean we just never address it because we're kind of living in the status quo and saying, oh, I guess I'm trying to differentiate between the first, where we just kind of let it keep going as a it'll go away versus the second.
Yes. So the first one is just kind of like ignoring it and actually kind of not thinking of it's that big of a deal
Mhm.
and thinking we don't have to do any intervention. And then the second one is when we're intervening in the wrong way, but very heavily intervening. Like we are modifying everything, and like our house revolves around our anxious child because we are like constantly walking on eggshells and tiptoeing around them because we don't want to upset them.
Got
And
it.
even going through like rituals and ridiculous like routines because we're like, if we don't, everyone's going to have a meltdown and that's even worse, you
Got it.
know?
Avoiding
So,
everything that might trigger or that
yes,
might, I
yes.
understand. Perfect. Thank you.
So before we get into some of the tools, I would love to share this idea of the anxiety equation. And this is not something that I, created, but it's something that I've heard people talk about, and it really resonated with me because it made me. I think it really simplifies the idea of anxiety and helps us gain awareness of like the areas that we can affect it and intervene. So people with anxiety, they tend to, and I hope that the bars aren't blocking the slide, but hopefully you can see, but I'll read what the slide says if you can't see it. But people with anxiety, they tend to overestimate risk and they underestimate their resources. And this is what creates the anxious state. And it doesn't always reflect reality, but this is what creates anxiety. And so what we often do as a reflex, our kids do this and we do this as their parents, we try to shrink the risk. We try to just take them out of every situation that will feel problematic or uncomfortable. And so, yes, we're able to help them not be anxious, but we are in the process really making their world, and they are making their world be very, very small. And it's safe and small, and they have little anxiety, but they're missing out on a lot of things. So, an alternative to this, is when we can really empower our kids with resources and then they can face risk. And I'm not talking about like um, foolish risk, I'm talking about um, risk that enables us to reach our goals, like trying new things, putting ourselves out there, going and talking to that person so we can make a new friend. I'm talking about these healthy risks that really help us grow because that's what we all want for our kids. We want our kids to grow.
Absolutely. I don't know how many times I've said, be brave. You can do, you
Yes,
can go
right.
ask for that thing, or you can go talk to that person. You can advocate for yourself.
Exactly. And so, how do we help our kids recognize their resources? Like the first step is just that they recognize the resources that are already there. And then the next step is to also learn more resources and tools. I kind of make an analogy of being on a roller coaster. So none of us would ever go on a roller coaster if we hadn't seen many other people go on a roller coaster safely, if we didn't know that there was a safety mechanism in place, like the bar that comes down or a seat belt. But because we know that those safety measures are in place, we feel more resourced to put ourselves through that experience. But if we didn't have that knowledge or connection with those things, that we never would get on a roller coaster. And I personally don't get on roller coasters anyway because I don't like roller coasters. But
I was just on one this week, so this hits home really close.
but a lot of people like them and can relate to the idea of like it's a thrill to experience the ups and downs, and it's a thrill to experience the ups and downs of life, really. Especially when we feel resourced, then we're game for it, and we can like be done and get off the ride and be like, whoa, that was amazing, but um so I, as a pediatrician in my clinic and in my programs online, I use an integrative approach, and so I focus on mind, body, and spirit strategies. um, and I think this is vital. When we only go to medication and therapy, we are limiting ourselves, and there's so many more possibilities. So one of the main go-tos is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is amazing, which is helpful, um, but it's not the only thing. And I do have some issues sometimes with how therapy is delivered, and um, that sometimes the family is kind of pushed out of the circle, the therapy circle, and I really take a different approach where it's very family supportive and family affirming, because we as moms, we're on the front lines. We don't need to be pushed out of the healing circle. We are the front line of the healing circle. So anyway,
The
um,
healing happens on a daily basis, right outside and
yes,
everywhere.
it doesn't happen in a weekly therapy session. It happens, 24/7 as we live our lives. And so we as parents need to be resourced so we can stand in a mentorship role. And so that's what I do. Um, but the cognitive behavioral therapy principles definitely are things that I teach within my program. Um, Also, mindfulness tools. Mindfulness being, non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, and really being able to sit with our emotions. And then imagery. I have advanced training in medical hypnosis and teaching kids self-hypnosis, really getting themselves into a very in tune state and being able to make important adjustments that are very intentional and therapeutic. And our minds are so powerful when we use them to actually secure our own mental wellness. In terms of the body, yes, sometimes medication is helpful and necessary, but it's not the only thing, and it should not be the first thing. Um, the lifestyle factors are really where I begin. So I do this 360 assessment of like looking at how is your child's nutrition? How are they sleeping? Are they moving their body regularly? And how are you balancing and using screen time and technology in an intentional way? Because these four foundational principles really, like, if we try to skip over those steps, we're like putting a band-aid on a festering wound. It's really ridiculous, but we do it all the time.
Mhm.
So, and also breathing techniques. Vigorous exercise in and of itself is a way that we can balance brain chemicals. And it's a very powerful tool. Dr. John Rady, he's the author of a book called Spark. He says that vigorous exercise is like taking a little Prozac and a little Ritalin.
Oh,
And I think, wow, that's a really helpful thing to think about, because a lot of us don't love the idea of putting our kids on medication if it's not necessary. And sometimes it is. Sometimes we really do need some like biochemistry help, brain biochemistry help. But just the knowledge that we can do this by just doing things that are healthy anyway, like exercising. Wow, if we would just do it,
that's why I
yoga.
feel so much better after having go. Right? I'm ready to come back to my mom things, to my whatever it is.
Yes, exactly. Yoga is something that is wonderfully therapeutic, especially when it's used intentionally as a therapeutic tool. And so I've been trained in a program called Yoga Calm that really helps kids through, from help it helps them learn to get from one emotional state to another using yoga. And it's amazing. Then there's like aromatherapy, there's grounding with our five senses, there's tapping, also called emotional freedom technique. And I have a certain way that I teach it to help, so it's more accessible to kids, and so it can really help them process in also a cognitive way, but really in a bodily way, some of the stressors that they're experiencing. And I also have done a lot of training in nutritional and bio-individual nutrition, helping kids really find the right um, diet plan. I mean, I don't like to think about diet, so I should say nutrition plan to support their mental health.
It's
Um,
unfortunate that the word diet has,
yeah, it's
seems to have
really
a
a neutral
negative.
word,
Yeah,
but I had to change that because I know that it's not neutral in how we receive it. But
I understand what you mean.
and then this last category, it is the most ignored category of all, and it is our spirit selves, to actually nourish our spirit. And I define spirituality as, what gives us meaning, purpose, and connection. And so it doesn't mean that you have to be, you know, observant religiously, but it might mean that. It might mean that you have developed spiritual practices that work for you and that you engage in them. It might mean that you take time journaling and processing and really developing a relationship with your own self and self reflection. It might mean that you surround yourself with uplifting and encouraging ideas. It might mean that you participate in singing and dance and um, painting and drawing and writing poetry, um, and not in an academic performance sense, not in a, oh no, I have to get this right or I'm going to get cut from the dance team, but just like expressing yourself in a playful way, like we used to do, like we used to do when we were like 5.
You're
I
not worried
remember
about that grade or that whatever it is, just for fun.
I remember with my sister, we would put on our nightgowns and my mom would put on a record and we would dance around the living room. Like we pretend we were ballerinas, and it was so wonderful. And it's just like this flowing, open-hearted feeling when I think about that. And how often do we, like as moms, like just like dance around our house? Like probably not very often unless we're like reminding ourselves, oh, I could do this.
You're
Um,
just reminding me I need to go turn on, my music periodically when I cook or something so that I can do something um, while I do the other things or even laundry, maybe just.
right. And music is so powerful to me personally as well. And it's interesting because I feel a little bit like as technology has changed, I've kind of fell away from listening to music as regularly because I used to live in a city that had this wonderful classical music station that I could turn on anytime and it would just be amazing. Um, and I don't have that now, just on the local radio. Um, Also, I used to have CDs. I have this great CD collection, but nobody has a CD player anymore. Like they're not in
What are
cars
CDs?
anymore.
Kids don't even know.
Right. And so, like moving to other things, I haven't quite made the leap, and I'm missing that. I'm feeling that gap because I haven't adapted to still find ways to incorporate that as much. But I do like sing in this chamber choir, and I actually have a children's choir because I believe so strongly in music as a therapeutic tool. I want that for my kids and for the kids in my community. Um, Gratitude practices, and a lot of times people are like, ugh, I don't want to feel grateful, like I don't want to feel like I have to feel grateful. But it really changes our physiology when we shift to a gratitude orientation, and we can make it a practice, if we actually are in practice of thinking about things that are good and positive, things that other people did for us, things that we experienced, things that we were able to do for others. This is really valuable. Um, and service and kind of altruism is very valuable. It's interesting because there is research that talks about two main factors for like severe depression and even suicide are lacking a sense of participation and belonging. And one amazing way to create that is to reach out to other people and to feel like you've done something for somebody. And in my parenting program, it's a compassion-based parenting program that really helps teach families how to incorporate altruism and service as a family in order to bring healing, because I think it is such a vital practice.
I love
Um,
that. We've actually talked about it a lot in our family because we feel like we used to do a lot more things outside the home, service projects, things of that nature, pre-kids. And then once we had little kids, it became harder to do something as a family. But now that my kids are getting a little bit older in the elementary ages, something that we can do together would be really nice. So we've started talking about what might that look like.
yeah, I think that's wonderful. And as parents, we have to constantly be doing this shift of like what is developmentally appropriate and realistic now, and what is developmentally appropriate and realistic now, and how about now? Like because our kids are like constantly in different stages. But we can, as a family, make it a practice, and it doesn't have to take more time, and it's just an orientation, basically. And it can be very bonding and connecting and valuable. And I think the pandemic really was um, it created a shift also because it changed the ways that we could reach out to each other, and some of us sort of just kind of got in our own little bubble and stopped, and we miss that. We miss those connections, and we can go reclaim them. Like we're not on lockdown anymore, but we're kind of like
Absolutely.
acting like we are sometimes. But some of the cultural expectations have changed a little bit. Like it feels less comfortable to go knock on someone's door than it used to. And it's just
Absolutely.
interesting. But we need to like push through that and not be affected by that. Um, Time in nature is so valuable. It's so healing to see the majesty of nature and the patterns in nature, and sometimes the irregularity of nature, like the cloud patterns and the way that leaves fall on the ground. Um,
It's so funny because I have to almost pull my children out to go on a hike or a bike ride or something, but then they love it once they get out there.
that is our experience totally. And I also have often thought to myself that the outdoors was like a perfect gift for like boy moms because it's a place where they can throw things, break things, like
Fun things.
chase and catch things that are living, like climb. It's such a gift, and it's not just to boys, but that's I'm a boy mom, and so that's what I think of. But it's really a need that my kids have. They need to explore. They need to like have this physical relationship with their environment, and so often they're in places where they have to be like, don't touch that, sit in your desk, they're in having so many restrictions placed on them. And so to be able to just like wade in a stream and have all these sensory experiences, and like dig in the mud and throw rocks and
Yeah.
break sticks, and it's just wonderful. So
I love it too.
um and then just fostering relationships. So often like we know those people, like we can call them to mind, the people who we love to be around, who help regulate us. But how often do we actually make a point of spending time with those people? And it's interesting, there's a therapist named Bonnie Badenoch, and she talks about how this idea of self-regulation is really a myth, that we all are co-regulating with an internalized other, meaning that, we carry with us the presence of like these regulating people in our lives, but it doesn't always just have to be like in isolation that we like just remember them. Like we can, in many cases, if they're still on this earth, we can actually call them, text them. But I am in a situation where both my parents have passed away, but I can connect with the wisdom that they've given me. I can take a moment to remember them and think about them, and kind of connect with the gifts that they've given me.
To have
And
some great mom friends as well. And I had a stressful moment this past weekend, or I guess last weekend, and I could hear her voice of, what would you tell me if this were me, right? And I know I would tell her so much different than what I was speaking to myself, right?
Yes,
So you
yes.
hear those voices for sure.
Mhm. And another avenue, like another layer of relationships is like helping our kids connect with their extended family and even like their ancestors, to be able to understand the stories and understand the context in which that they were born, were born. um I think there's been research showing that that helps kids emotional health, to understand their basically their family tree. And I think that that is very fascinating. And then just like play and laughter, sometimes we get so, you know tuned into just like what procedurally needs to get done each day, and we are roped into it as moms too. It's like, oh, I have to wake up, I have to make breakfast, I have to pack lunches, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to fold laundry, I have to,
Absolutely.
maybe do my work, I have to like work from home, or I have to go into the office, then I have to, pick up the kids, then I have to, um
Juggling it
and then
all.
it just starts over the next day. And we need to play and we need to laugh. It was so interesting because I have 8 sons, but one son in particular always reminds me of this. And he's now 21, and he recently sponsored this huge food fight. It's like not something that I do. So I'm always like, oh, we don't want to waste food. We don't want to make a mess. We don't, it seems so irresponsible, But he sponsored this huge cupcake fight. And so he wanted to do it. And so we rallied around him, and we as a family made over 2,000 cupcakes. And then we gathered with people in the community and we just threw them at each other and like smeared frosting on each other. And it was not necessarily the activity that I would choose, but I felt a little bit like a kid again, and it was wonderful. So we need time for that.
Yeah, my kids have gotten back into trampolining. And so almost every day, even if it's 10 minutes, they're like, can you come trampoline with us? And we just have fun. And sometimes people get hurt, but we've
Right.
all survived. We're okay.
Yes, yes. And it's can be hard to just be like, as a parent, what, what will I allow my kids to do and experience and explore, and how do I keep them safe and free from injury and all this stuff. And it really is a balance. We have to live and let our kids live. We have to um just be very discerning and in tune with, yes, our mom wisdom and intuition, but also a sense of honoring an experience of like joyful exploration. So, and all these things, I just list them to open parents' eyes to the many tools that are available to all of us. Like some things are not available readily to us because maybe we don't have the resources to do therapy, or we don't, we can't afford medication, we don't have insurance, we don't, and usually there are ways with kids to find those resources that are really needed, you know but often we don't need to go there if we would put these other things into place. And so, through my programs, I've curated very specific ways to learn these things, because it's also can be very overwhelming to see a list like this, because then we're like, oh no, now I have to schedule all this in, and I have to like go through the 100,000 Google, search results when, to find the right resource and the right tool. And you don't need to do that. Sometimes you can connect with a mentor and they can guide you. So anyway,
Yeah. But there's so many, right? But I do like that they all kind of, or not all, but some of them tie into each other, and they
yes,
all just work together. I love that.
yes. And so I want to just say and invite people, I do have an upcoming workshop, and it's called Empowering Anxious Kids. And you can find it by going to my website. And Amy, I think you're going to include a specific link
Absolutely.
where they can come to it through you.
We want to leave our moms with something they can do today, a quick action or challenge that they can do, and let us know how it went or if they have questions. So, can you give our moms a challenge for today?
Yes. So what I would challenge you to do is, even if you have to like rewind the video, go and look at that list that I just gave you and choose one thing. Choose one thing you can do with your kids today that is accessible to you, that sounds interesting to you, that resonates with you, that kind of fills a need that you perceive in your family to help there be more more emotional grounding and wellness. And so I would love for you to do that. Also, I hope that you will join me in the challenge. And I have a TEDx talk that addresses this constant feeling like we have to do more and make things perfect for our kids. And so I would love to include a link for that too, that's something you could go watch today as well.
I love that. I love that. I think I need to go have a dance party. I think that's what I heard from this.
Let's do it.
That's going to be my takeaway challenge. Maybe
Yes.
I'll pick something else. I'm going to pick a few. Be an overachiever. But this was so great. Thank you, Dr. Mary, for being with us today. And like she said, go check out that freebie course. It is going to be amazing. I'm going to be there. And be sure to come back for more amazing summit speakers.